Oops, here we go. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I know everyone's muted, so we'll just unmute for a second and say good morning. And I will say thanks to everybody for joining us this morning on the Juice, and thanks to our panelists for being here for a really interesting discussion. This week we're going to be talking about, maybe we could have everybody for a second, and I'll talk, and then I'll introduce everyone. This morning we're going to talk about mobility. And just the importance of plan in our community, or how to get around in our downtown and outside spaces. Panelists are all representing different organizations who have intricately been part of the mobility plan in Grand Rapids. So I'm excited to have this discussion today, and I'm hoping that for those people that are watching, it'll be informational. We want to encourage questions as you listen to the panelists talk about some of the things that are happening in Grand Rapids. Please feel free to ask questions and also make comments. So we will proceed like we normally do with the Juice. So my panelists this morning are Kristin Bennett from the city of Grand Rapids. And I'm going to go in order of how I see you guys on the screen. Johannah Jelks, who is part of the community member of the mobility panel, and she's also a business owner, so that's that she brings that perspective. Then we have Monoyios, who is with the Rapid. We have Fawna Tucker, who's with May Mobility, and then we have Mark Miller from DGRI. So welcome this morning, everyone. And I think we'll get things started by having each panelist give an overview of the organization that they're with and what the role is in mobility. So this morning, we'll start out with Kristin.
Sure, I'll just give a quick overview of, I manage transportation engineering and safety projects actually for the city of Grand Rapids. And I'm actually a Grand Rapids native. I've lived away for quite a number of years working for several other cities throughout the country, but I moved home a few years ago, actually to support my aging parents as their health and mobility really began to change. And but I've spent the past about 20 years really working on progressive transport design and planning, funding, and project management. The importance of how we can we provide better transportation and mobility for more people in our communities is really the crux of what I've worked on. So, and that's what I'm working on here in Grand Rapids as well.
Great, thanks, Kristin. How about Mark with DGRI?
Yeah, so DGRI is a managing entity for our DDA and for our downtown improvement district. So we wear many hats in terms of both place making, city building, and place management. And I think that in terms of our aspirations and with mobility, we are sort of engaged in a lot of different things, a lot of times teaming up and collaborating with the city of Grand Rapids in rebuilding some of our streets and you know, strategizing on where we might put transit infrastructure, bike infrastructure, and making the streets more pedestrian friendly and really more people centric as we begin to rebuild them. So a lot of stuff in terms of that.
Oops, I think Mark froze. So maybe if Murphy's watching, maybe we can get that technology figured out. In the meantime, let's move over to Nikos.
Great. Good morning. Nikos, or Nick Monoyios. I'm the planning manager at the Rapid. Also recently finished the Laker Line BRT, which I also managed that project as well. 7 years from start to finish. So overall, the Rapid provides the transit services for the 6 cities. So Grand Rapids, Kentwood, Wyoming, Granville, East Grand Rapids, and Walker. And so the integration of these 6 cities as sort of our urban region, we are the mass transportation, public transportation provider in that area. And over the 20 years that I've been in planning at the Rapid, ridership has increased fivefold. We're continuing to add more services. We're continuing to also always look toward adding more services, more frequencies, more geographies, and also just have the privilege to work with Mobile GR and Kristin, as well as DGRI, and the new May Mobility, how that's integrated. So, and Johannah is on one of the Goal 3 Alliance, the Mobility Alliance. So among these folks on the panel as well, I think, we've got a great group of mobility-minded individuals and stakeholders that we're really kind of leading the way and maximizing the value that mobility has as a sort of supporting catalyst to the advantages of the entrepreneurial landscape. So I look forward to having this conversation with everybody today. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Fawna with May Mobility.
Sure. Great. Thank you. Good morning. I'm Fawna. I am a customer success manager at May. I work directly with our customers, so specifically Mobile GR and our partners at Seamless, to help deploy the AVGR route in the downtown Grand Rapids area. I work directly with our customers to help develop relationships, advocate for them internally and externally, and walk through onboarding and education process to ensure alignment with our project goals. Currently, we're deployed in downtown Grand Rapids in a 3.2 mile first last mile deployment. And our mission is to build transportation systems that help solve mobility problems such as first and last mile by developing and deploying autonomous shuttles to get people where they need to go.
Great, thanks. We'll go to Joanna and then we'll come back to Mark.
Good morning. I am so happy to be here. So thank you, Laurie and Murphy. You guys are awesome. I started off doing neighborhood work with East Hills Neighborhood Association it's been almost 10 years, which is kind of crazy. That's where I learned a lot about mobility and walkability. The first time I heard about a walkability score in a neighborhood was through East Hills, and I guess I just really loved what mobility stood for and how to make it interesting for younger people and a younger generation. I joined the Mobility and Placemaking Committee at Downtown Grand Rapids, Inc. about 5 years ago. Well, there's a couple committees I served on, and originally Bill Kirk, who now works at the Rapid, got me involved with mobility as well downtown, and I've been in love with mobility ever since. So it's been a wonderful ride, and I'm super excited for the future of mobility. I think more people are going to get out and bike and ride and walk more than ever now. So I think we're going to see some awesome opportunities.
Thank you. And then Mark, I know you were midstream when you kind of froze up on us. So I don't know if you remember where you were, but maybe just.
Yeah, I don't know where I cut off at. So I guess I'll just say that DGRI is a collaborator in terms of building more people-centric places, and that oftentimes falls on our streets as one of our largest public realms in our downtown.
That's great. And, from Start Garden's perspective, I think one of the reasons that we feel mobility is a really interesting issue is as it affects entrepreneurs and business owners. It's the ability for people to get around town and get to them and to have access to them. It's also an interesting opportunity for entrepreneurs to think about innovations around mobility. So there's a lot of different ways that you can come at it, but in general, the way we're able to move around in our cities is really of interest and important for everyone. There's a lot of different ways we can approach it, but I think maybe Kristin, you can touch on, just, somewhere at some point there has to be a plan. And so I know that the city has been working on the mobile GR plan for a while, and then all of these other organizations fit into that plan in one way or another. So maybe you could, talk a little bit about the plan, and then we can kind of talk about the components and how each of these organizations and ideas fit in.
Well, there's actually multiple plans. I mean, I think that's the one thing with the city going back 20 years. I kind of had been digging back when I did a bike master plan for the city last year. And I tried to go back and find every iteration of conversations about bicycling, but it really was all about starting in the master plan almost 20 years ago now, in 2002, was that there was a whole chapter to talk about balanced transportation and the need to provide more options, safer options to more people. It was no longer, just focused on the traditional focus of transportation which is streets and maintenance and it's, oh, I'm gonna have a dog whine, hang on. Modern working from home and a dog who wants to go outside.
I love it.
Yeah, so it's the other one sleep quietly for the entire day over here. But and I think that was really the start. And there were more and more plans, like the Green Grand Rapids plan in 2011, and then we developed a complete streets that directed staff and said, it's important to build streets that work for all people, not just a certain type of traveler. And for obviously a long time, much has been driven to focus on motorized traffic, and we still have plenty of it, and that's not going away, but it's really transitioning a lot. Vital street income tax measure was passed that really put some resources into our hands and started being able to not just improve the pavement of our streets and sidewalks, but we have taken that complete streets guidance. We also layered it with green streets, so adding in a way to how do we make our less impactful environment? Can we increase our tree canopy? Manage our stormwater, and every project we do with those funds follow guidelines. So we're really focusing a lot on safety, improving multimodal access. We coordinate with all types of organizations during those projects, including partner here on this call. Even our parks master plan said, we want to have a park within a 10-minute walking distance of every resident. So goals that fall in lots of plans. And I was directed in 2018 to do a bike plan for the city. We've never had one. That focuses on not just lines on a but also how does it relate to connections to transit, bike parking, bike share, education, maintenance system, and who we partner with. And then we moved into having a broader mobility plan that actually was tied to economic development, because those are kind of linchpins that kind of sometimes go together and people don't think about it. And the conversation around transportation has morphed from, like I said, that focused streets to mobility, equity around transportation, and how can transportation and mobility investments, drive economic development and economic vitality and resiliency. And I think we're in the middle of a resiliency conversation right now with the pandemic, and we're doing a lot on our end and working with a lot of these partners here on how do we take our transportation infrastructure and think about mobility services even in a worldwide crisis. So,
Right.
And I think when we relate back to businesses, transportation mobility can often be a real pain point for business, because it's how do you establish a location or expand in a place that's can serve your needs, but that you can also get employees.
Mhm.
And job seekers, it can be a real negative that they cannot consistently get to work. And so the transportation, that cost transportation, that reliability, all those things affect how businesses and the employees they need, and even the customers or clients and get and access them is really, is really all tied together. And I think that's where that last plan with the equitable economic development and strategic plan, it's a total mouthful to say, but really try to put those elements together. And then we have our own, short-term city strategic around that focuses on safety and mobility and health, and how do we do that and deliver that, you know, and we're delivering it not on our own, but, you know, in partnership with everyone on this call and other players. And he's decided to settle down now. So
that's okay. So for the rest of the panel, please feel free to jump in. I mean, I want this to be sort of a conversation where we all kind of jump in on different points and things. So instead of me calling on people, you can speak up at any point. But you know, I think if anybody wants to talk about you know, the cost of transportation and how, you know, how are we working, or how is everybody here working on the idea that, you know, cars don't have to be the only way that people get around. So there's all kinds of other options. And that was, you know, that's one thing that we've talked about.
I'll go ahead and take a stab at that. Thanks. And to piggyback a lot on what Kristin introduced, I think, but maybe I'll start just offering kind of a question for, you know, contemplation. You know, the idea that transportation, it's the second most expensive piece of a household besides housing, right behind housing, and that number continues to grow. And when we talk about transportation cost, I think it's important to think of both the cost from the consumer end of things. So not only the when we're talking about automobiles, you know, the car, the gas, insurance, and so on. But I also think it's really important to understand the impacts of the geographic cost that plays into transportation and mobility as well. We're really seeing that in addition to how it affects the pocketbook, we're realizing that we can no longer be sustainable and competitive as a city, as a region, as a community by building to the scale and speed of a car. That is something that I think we're realizing the consequences of that for the latter half of the 20th century, that everything was built, and we largely see this in our suburban areas, that it was built to the scale and speed of a car. How do we get there for a car? Where do we store the car? So we've got oceans of asphalt and parking lots that have kind of proven that they've contributed to the decay and disinvestment of areas because it was not built for the human. It wasn't not built for commerce or the human activity, the battery of our economic structure, which relies on people. And when the trump card for how we design our American landscape was always been based on needing space for cars, we've realized that we've got to kind of reinvent that. So all of these alternative modes of transportation that Kristin introduced are so important because not only is it more effective from a consumer standpoint, it is more effective from a geographic standpoint, which both fall into this category of opportunity cost, which then we can apply toward improved economic development considerations that can catalyze the entire business environment. So I'll kind of introduce that talking point maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mark, maybe you can comment on, how activating the streets right now has been something that, a lot of cities are focusing on to help during the pandemic. And how does that, car traffic and people, moving around in cars is not necessarily, you're utilizing spaces that might be utilized by cars. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's been something that we've been watching since probably April of this year, and it's sort of a worldwide phenomenon where we're especially seeing it in Europe and the United States, where initially there was a lot of talk about turning streets into bike streets, so removing traffic or partially removing traffic, or just pedestrian streets. And this was largely in response to having people have the ability to get outside and walk during the real difficult period of the shutdown early on in March and April. And then that manifested later into realizing that once we reopened our restaurants, and bars, that they were going to need a place to sit outside. So I think that that's where the city of Grand Rapids, DGRI, came into sort of collaboration to begin to take some of the streets away from the automobile, pinch them down, and take that space and reallocate it or rebalance it towards having some outdoor seating. So you'll see those throughout the downtown, and now they're popping up in some of the near neighborhoods as well. And so like Ionia Street, Bridge Street, Monroe Center in particular downtown. And what we're finding is that those are working on multiple levels. So they're obviously working for the businesses. And this is where, you know, we're taking space and we're reallocating it so that those businesses have more outdoor seating and more capacity to sustain themselves. And that's a little bit towards the resilient aspect that Kristin was referring to earlier. We look at it through a recovery lens. And then the other thing is realizing that once we did that, the world didn't end. You know, we still have access to the downtown. We still have the ability to move cars through downtown. In particular, I think Bridge Street is an interesting example of this, where we took a whole lane away from Bridge Street. We still have two-way traffic going east and westbound in a one-block area, so it's pinched. We would say, I guess, the capacity of that has shrunk in terms of its ability to move cars, but the cars are still moving, and we're still able to get access to and from. The same is probably true on Ionia, where we've pinched that down a little bit, reallocated some of the space, rebalanced the street, and we're still getting traffic flow there, albeit in a one-way format. So I think that from our standpoint, at least at this juncture, we're seeing that we're able to manipulate these streets a little bit, rebalance them towards giving more space to people, and it all is still working. And I think that from the standpoint of where we come from today, at least at DGRI, is that we realize, at least anecdotally, that if you give space to a car, the car is going to take the space. So by you providing more space, that just simply means that you're going to have more cars. And this has been a sort of a thing that's happened over the course of the last 60 or 70 years. And we can't continue to just keep taking space for the car and not thinking about all the other users of that street, whether they be on foot or pedaling a bike or on a skateboard. So I think that this is a great time from where we are to begin to reset and rethink about these things in a very meaningful way, and not try to come back to what was thought of as normal in last year at this time.
Yeah, absolutely. Fawna, let's. I want to make sure that you have an opportunity to kind of talk about the May Mobility pilot project, because I think that I think it's exciting. You know, I mean, the idea of autonomous vehicles is kind of, you know, new. And the fact that, you know, Grand Rapids was chosen as one of the locations to kind of be a pilot for this is really exciting, and it's fun. I mean, it's something that we can, you know, we can talk about and say that, you know, we're one of the few cities that's trying this right now. So.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a great segue. So one of the things that when we think about the purpose of the route, we look at it in two ways. So first, May Mobility shuttles provide a service by connecting commuters, residents, you know, visitors along the Dash West route to city hotspots, parking options outside the city center. At the same time, the AVGR pilot is also gauging the public interest as it applies to AVs and how our city and partners can help better plan and develop infrastructure for long-term mobility needs. So really thinking about like the purpose of the project and how that kind of just has evolved into, this really great pilot. One of the things that Mark kind of touched on was how we are kind of taking back the streets for pedestrian use, for restaurants, and just in a COVID response. So definitely interesting to see how our technology is able to adapt to kind of those social spaces and to be able to be pinched on the street one of the great things that we have about, May Mobility and just having the shuttles with the first and last mile is that our goals are to reduce congestion, and we can do that by moving a lot of people in micromobility ways. So that's really just kind of the overall goal of the project. Prior to COVID, our average ridership was about 500 riders per day, sometimes topping in at 6, just depending on kind of the pulse of the city. And during COVID, with our clean shuttle response, we've been able to move just over 100 riders per day, with some days topping out at 130. So I'll touch a little bit more in a little bit about our COVID kind of just response as a whole. But we're still seeing a pulse of a city, and we're still seeing people need to move. So I think it's really important when we're kind of, looking at past and kind of having that pat on the back, but then looking forward into COVID and kind of the future, just seeing people actually getting out in the city and needing the service to be able to move.
Yeah. Great. Johannah, I want you to jump in.
Oh, wow. She is really good. I think for me, it's more important to talk about like equity and gender equity within mobility. I think that's something that is that will help bring some context to especially people who don't know as much about neighborhoods and how transportation plays a vital role in neighborhoods and community building. In Black and Brown communities, especially, a lot of our residents do use public transportation. However, they're not necessarily at the table to voice their concerns or even their ideas. And so I think it's really important that that we keep that kind of social justice perspective during this time too with transportation, that transportation is also a way to connect communities and make them feel viable. As far as what I do is She Rides Her Own Way. When I first started it, it was just a bike campaign, just to get women out to bike around the neighborhoods to different businesses, kind of like a hop. And it was always really fun. And I just kept getting more and more people, and I tried new ideas. And I think one thing that I always express on our committee is that it's really important to make mobility engaging and market it and brand it to not only to a different generation, but to, again, diversity, equity, and bringing, not straying away. Public transportation has been very divisive in our history in the United States. And I think as a beautiful Black woman now, I'm thankful for Rosa Parks and various transportation leaders. But, it's always been something that's, has the ability to bring others together. And so everybody here on this panel finds ways to do that, but it's really exciting to be involved with mobility right now.
Yeah. Anyone want to take that on?
I would.
I can.
Oh, go ahead, Fawna.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of just reiterate what she just said. I think it's important for us to keep the accessibility and equality just focus in mind. One of the things that we've kind of have been able to really lean hard into Grand Rapids is our wheelchair accessible and other disability accessible projects that we're working on. With the help of the community, we've led focus groups, and we've been able to deploy our wheelchair accessible shuttle, which is a micro mobility solution for accessibility. That's something that we're really excited and proud of, and we're continuing to have reiterations and improvements to that platform that we have input, we have community input that make this product better. So I definitely want to plus one on that. It's definitely in the forefront of kind of the things that we're pushing forward in long-term planning.
Yeah, I was just going to add.
Oh, go ahead, Kristin.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, I think at least, and transportation happens in several departments in the city, and we work really closely together, whether it's our department, mobile GR department, engineering department, and public services who leads on maintenance of our system. All those three things work together, but we've been very intentional, at least since I've been here, on trying to come out to the public to do public engagement, as opposed to necessarily expecting them to come to us. I know with the lecture and the bike plan, I spent hundreds of hours going out to community events, to community meetings, as to create our own, and getting to a really huge range of people so that we heard as broad a voice. We worked with community partners to do groups and let them, they're the knowledgeable experts in their communities, guide us on to connect with people in different neighborhoods or different socioeconomic groups. We have a really strong connection with the disability advocates in Kent County, because accessibility is important. And I think the importance is that really the focus is on, regardless of your age, regardless of what neighborhood you live in, regardless of your race or ethnicity, or your ability, gender, all those things are critically important when it comes to transportation, and everyone has different needs, and those needs change throughout your life. And so it's the importance of continuing to go back to the community and talk to them and have that dialogue about transportation and what they need, and how we can provide that, all of us on the call and all of our partners that we work with. So.
Yeah, I'll just add two things to that. It's fascinating in some ways that the Americans with Disabilities Act turned 30 this year, and we are really heavily collaborating with the disability advocates of Kent County through various years to really think about all of the accessibility issues that still exist in our city and are manifested daily for many people who have to navigate that city. So I think that even though that law is, or that act is in place, we're still finding that it oftentimes doesn't quite get us where we need to be. It establishes a baseline. So we're working really hard to begin to implement some things that will hopefully make the city better. And I think it's all based on a philosophy that we're designing for the most vulnerable user, and not sort of the average user. And that vulnerable user is sometimes even a child. We have not done a very good job thinking about kids being able to navigate and even walk to school. So I think that all of that stuff really heavily plays into that. And then the other thing, in terms of the equity aspect, much of this can be rooted in equity or in inequity. And I think one of the things I read yesterday in Streets Blog New York City was the idea that one of the legislators there was trying to get rid of the law against jaywalking, which is basically, when you're a pedestrian, you're asked to cross a street in a very specific location, often at a crosswalk, and at a signal, and pushing a button and all of that stuff. And what they're finding in New York City is that historically hasn't been the way people cross a street. They cross at the desire line or where they want to go. And what they found is that 9 of 10 jaywalking tickets in New York City are people of color. And so there's a built-in system that is creating some of the inequalities that exist, and those folks have to go to court. They usually pay a fine, and it's a self-reinforcing cycle that they're trying to get rid of. And I think that those are the little things that we can begin to do that can not solve inequity, but they can begin to make inroads towards a solution. So I think we can't solve it all at once, but we can make these little gestures and things in design and policy that can in fact impact it.
Interesting. That's really interesting. I guess I know, Fawna, you wanted to go back and I think talk a little bit more about May Mobility. Can we talk a little bit about, so my experience obviously with the vehicles was, I park sort of in an outlying parking lot. To me, I love the fact that Grand Rapids, and especially in the downtown, it is very walkable. It's a beautiful place to walk. I mean, we've got the river, we've got, it's just gorgeous. But then we also have weather issues where it makes it, not conducive to walking. So then I would either take the dash bus, or you look for a May mobility vehicle. And I think, for somebody like me, it was kind of a new concept for me. I was, I always was, you think I've got to drive into the city, I've got to park right next to my office. And it's really kind of, I think for me, it was refreshing to not have that and not have that opportunity. And so I do think, May mobility is really, talk about the pilot project a little bit and the opportunity to expand that beyond maybe just the dash bus route.
Yeah, so kind of a couple of things. So when we're looking at kind of the patterns that we're seeing, we did conduct a survey in late 2019 that had some really interesting findings. And what we were actually uncovering was that we are a complement to the existing mobility services. So adding additional micromobility and mobility services into your cities is where we're finding success and adoption. So allowing there to be multiple options for people really does allow the rider to choose their path. And we're finding that, with education and public interest, we can definitely bring AVs into that conversation. But overall, last year, the Dash route did see increase with the AVGR deployment. So I think that's important when we're talking about the ecosystem of GR, is just knowing that we're working together with other transportation and micromobility solutions, again, to bring movement into the city. One of the other things just about kind of expanding into other areas of Grand Rapids is we really want to just catch the pulse of the movement again with the city. And so when we're looking at reducing congestion or better use of roads with social spaces and things like that, we're really kind of looking at where our technology will kind of complement what's already existing. And is it off hours? Is it maybe, like we said, we're reducing rides per, occupants per ride in the COVID response. So are we allowing people to reserve? Are we allowing, these are some of the bigger questions that we're asking when we're talking about the future of GR. I think it's important for us to also kind of look at, the complementing, and then where we can fill where maybe there's a transportation desert or something along those lines. So that's really kind of been our goal when we're talking through towards the end of this pilot and just kind of where we can go from here. There's a lot there. So
yeah. What's been the input of the business community? So, I mean, obviously there's been input from the public, but on the flip side, what is the input from business and how they'd like to see mobility, help or enhance, what they have?
I think we can all agree that with the pandemic, we've kind of seen a shift in what people are using mobility for and kind of how they're using it. So when we're talking about businesses in the downtown, we're talking about the social spaces, or before where they had to pay for parking, closer to their business for their employees or their customers. I think where May kind of complements and where also the Dash complements this is we're able to allow pedestrians and allow riders to kind of jump on and get to where they need to go quickly, but also taking them to the areas that may have had an economical impact on the business owners themselves. So taking them closer to their business, location, or maybe adopting, a new space in the city where they weren't necessarily thinking before, because there's a mobility solution that gets their employees or their customers to that space. So I think when we're talking about May Mobility and Dash and other mobility services in GR, we're looking at the big picture of just how our our riders and our residents and commuters are using these spaces, and definitely shifting during COVID. But there will be some sort of new normal that we're going to have to adapt to. So I think that's probably where we're kind of focused right now.
And really, for all the panelists, I mean, that discussion about businesses and their input, and then, how the opportunities for people to have multiple choices when it comes to mobility, obviously means that there's multiple ways that they can get around to different parts of the city that they might not have been able to get to before. And so I'm really curious to see, what you all think the business community, how that benefits. And I think we touched on a little bit, but.
Well, I can, from the city's perspective, soon after COVID sort of hit, it was our directive, we were given a directive from our city leadership to find ways to, and you have to kind of go with, we weren't sure what changes were going to happen, but even from our perspective in my department, obviously we're close with the business districts and the DDA on the social zone spaces, so there's more space for outdoor seating and retailing. We were doing some loading so that, we had this sort of new pickup and takeout culture that's even more so now in terms of food or items. And so how do we make that convenient? And we've been thinking a lot about curbside management and how that supports businesses as well as different types of transportation services. So, whether it's people who might take Uber or Lyft or use taxis or, supporting paratransit access, that's becoming more and more challenging, and people who cannot use other transportation services and rely on that because of their different abilities. They need door-to-door service, and how do we do that in an urban area and get them door-to-door? And so all that's been part of our station, and especially things like how do we coordinate with the Rapid, and even we support the Dash service along in partnership with the DDA and the Rapid. Of course, the layering of the May mobility, and how do you provide a safer transit service right now, still maintaining some level of capacity to serve people, especially essential workers and people getting those basics like food and healthcare. So those were really on the forefront. And of course, now the ideas around, Mark talked about recovery or resiliency. We're bringing those travel options back in line. So mobility just restarted. And then we're going to be launching e-scooter and bike share services soon with 2 pilot vendors. And then the goal there is, again, adding another option, and it's being synced. We're doing virtual station planning through 12 square mile pilot service area that'll hit all the business districts downtown, lots of neighborhoods and key destinations. And we're connected to transit and our offsite parking locations, and really, trying to align it to what the public told us, during our bike share feasibility, that they want to get to those basic resources. They want to get to the grocery store. They want to get to libraries. They want to be able to use these options as a way to explore their city. And then eventually we might have some visitor traffic back when COVID's moved on. And we'll be more to what we experience with people coming and visiting and conventions and all of that brings to the community too. And we'll have even more options for people to use built into the system and pretty well synced, I think.
Yeah. Johannah, do you want to talk a little bit about scooters and things like that, and how some of those options, they're practical, but they're also really a lot of fun.
I'm really grateful to the city for actually taking on the scooters. That was a well-fought battle, and I'm very grateful. More importantly, to downtown Grand Rapids for the skate park that we worked really hard on and conceiving together and conceptualizing. And I think those are the ways that millennials are going to engage. I mean, we need to be in modern transportation. We need those. It's not even a question of. I think to make it a modern city, a city that's going to showcase their river, to showcase our downtown trails and our neighborhoods. Bike share, scooters. Places for pedestrian friendly streets or just pedestrian streets, business districts. Those are all things that we definitely will need moving forward. And I will say a lot of the Black and brown businesses, and we could speak to Jamil Robinson at Grand Rapids, African American Black businesses. I think it's really important that they are caught in they understand the conversation of the importance of transit. And I think that there's different types of business owners, and some value public transportation and some don't know how valuable it is. And having a dash stop is very valuable to a business. I mean, it's a great way to showcase. It's easy access. I recently was a mobility manager for the Midwest UX conference, design conference downtown last year, one of the largest design conferences in the nation. And they were astonished how beautiful Grand Rapids is. Mm-hmm. And they're coming all over the nation. And these are top creative designers. And they thought, what a great city, what great public transportation. But if you talk to some local business owners, they may not, and some young people, they may not know all of the features that we have to offer. So again, I'm really big on the marketing and branding and bringing young people, getting us at those tables, but also, hiring us, hiring different minds that can look at mobility different. It's not just sitting on a committee or board, but really hiring different thought leaders. And I think that will really add to the city, and I think it'll add to mobility in general. But we have a great team here, so I'm very impressed with everyone here.
That's great. It's hard without Murphy here to see if we've got questions. Because we've got about 10 minutes left. So I want to make sure if there's any questions out there. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, I saw that one. I'd definitely be happy to address that. And I think this is great timing. And Jorge sits on our steering committee for this project. So the city of Grand Rapids, Kentwood, and Wyoming received funds from the Federal Transit Administration to do a transit-oriented development study on the South Division corridor. So from Wealthy all the way down to 60th, which coincides with the Silver Line BRT, the state of Michigan's first bus rapid transit. And I was just reflecting on this past conversation. And again, to echo what Johannah just said, we have a great group of staff and willingness of a lot of folks in the community to recognize a lot of these what's. This paradigm shift in how we're thinking through transit and public transportation, mobility in general, and applying that is helping to influence policy a little bit. Now, a lot of that is easy to get kind of focused into what's happening downtown, but by staying true to equity and resilience concerns outside of the downtown is where we're seeing a lot of that disparity. And especially as it's related to automobile-oriented landscapes such as Division Avenue. So historically, Division has had, in our region, in 6 cities, the highest transit ridership corridor in our entire system, but it's also, as we're all probably aware, very auto-oriented. The building of 131 kind of sucked the life away from the vibrancy, and that it was primarily solely accessible by car kind of contributed to that desolation and disinvestment because there's no identity there. there's a few nodes, there's a few places along the corridor that kind of have some interest, but part of this transit-oriented development study, and transit-oriented development, TOD, refers to tenants that maximize the development value and placemaking around the scale of transit, orienting the places that we're building around the scale of transit, which means it's based on geographic density. So a lot of mixed use, a lot of attention to land use and zoning, so that it's not about the scale and speed of a car with parking. It's about humanizing space and make it a place that's interesting and distinguished and dignified for human beings to want to be, to give them that sense of community. This greatly impacts quality of life. It has an influence on housing and real estate. It can have the capacity to adjust the market. It can influence the market so that all of these factors can come together to help catalyze that economic development while minimizing that socioeconomic disparity that we're also used to seeing. So part of this study is to take all of those ingredients of transit-oriented development, all of those tenants, and we've always historically romanticized about what we're now, the jargon is TOD, but go anywhere around the world that you find this distinguished sense of identity and place, and it's all because it's not strewn with, oceans of asphalt and parking lots, but there's a sense of community that we long to build ourselves after. And so by establishing these tenants on South Division while mitigating the effects of gentrification is our North Star to this project. So we're about halfway through that. There's going to be some exciting outputs to this project. And one last thing I'll say is ultimately getting the grassroots community organizers from the neighborhoods and the bankers and developers and all of these folks that are part of this ecosystem of development, getting them all at the table together to understand that the grassroots community organizer is not necessarily the enemy of developer banker. We can all achieve those things for the betterment of the existing community and the population on South Division. So we're going to be excited to put some more information out for the community and are really hopeful that we can demonstrate some benefits of this, again, through largely a lot of the conversation that was brought up by my esteemed friends and colleagues here on this call.
Well, and, I think what's interesting too is, as, when you talk about placemaking, I mean, as I view Grand Rapids, you kind of think of the different neighborhoods and you think of there's downtown, and then you think of all the different things that are, the West Side and East Town and down on Division, and they're all, it's interesting to have them all be unique and diverse, but then how do we focus on connecting all of that? And I think that's obviously where this is going and what we want. You want to maintain the identity and the individual identity of each of those communities, but you want to make sure that there's equal accessibility for people to get around to all of those places. So, I mean, that to me is a challenge, but I mean, that's what, it's all about, really.
That's part of the fun to figure all this out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if we have any more questions, but we've got about 5 minutes left. And I want to make sure that each of you get an opportunity to kind of maybe, not wrap up, but talk about, final thoughts, continuing thoughts, and different ways that that people can engage in this conversation and continue it. So why don't we start with Johannah?
I'm so happy to hear this dialogue, and I hope others are able to take in some of the things that we're talking about. I think for me, I really, really want to encourage everybody get out and walk, and everybody get out and ride the neighborhoods, walk the neighborhoods. It's so different. You notice businesses that were never there when you walk or when you ride your bike. You notice people that you've never seen before. it's so important to do. Before I did this panel, I just walked about 3 miles, and I do that daily. And walking up Wealthy Street, I mean, I just love the community and the spirit that comes from that type of mobility. And of course, you save a lot of money. So for my generation, if you want to save some of your money for things that you rather have than instead of gas money, and use that to go to Hancock, or go to 40 acres, or if you want to save that money and put it elsewhere, or change.org, that's the way to go. I really hope and encourage that that young people are able to find themselves within the mobility plan. And I'm so excited for the skate park, so you'll see me a lot more when it comes to that.
Great, thank you. Nikos.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to quickly just advocate for staying and getting as much involved as possible, because just because we're here as panelists and have a professional capacity with these different modes of mobility, we're all citizens. And I think being exposed to so many different perspectives, and as Kristin was pointing out, the distinct value of that public engagement, we only have our own perspectives that we're trying to expose as much as possible from, but it's critically important to be a part of this conversation in your own community. Bring those ideas forward. Everybody's got such a unique sensibility of how we want to grow as a community, how we want to maintain that economically competitive edge, building places worth being, and everybody's ideas are so extremely valuable. And how do we move around, and what's the future going to look like? What kind of thinking do we need to abandon? It's that famous quote that locally we have, is that we don't have a parking problem, we have a walking problem, right? So what does that mean to people moving forward? So I'm just curious. I just want to, I'm a sponge wanting to learn everybody's thoughts and thinking on this, so that we collectively as staff can put those ideas into motion.
Thanks. Fawna.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just to wrap up, I want to just reiterate, we are a partner in mobility, and to kind of just echo what everyone else here is saying is, your feedback is important. So definitely get out there, try the technology, try the different mobility offerings that we have, and give your feedback. So be part of the discussion and help us, shape and mold the long-term future of mobility in Grand Rapids.
Kristin.
Make sure I'm unmuted. I think I would certainly reiterate what Nico said. As a longtime public servant, we always want to get as many perspectives as we can. And I listed a lot of plans, and there's a lot in there, and even there's area plans that are for neighborhoods and business districts as well, and the GR4 downtown master plan that we didn't talk about in much detail, but all of those plans have something in there for everybody, and it gives you an idea of what we've heard so far and where we're headed. But, we're always having to kind of react and adjust as community changes. I'm doing that right now. And, and even doing something as simple as, working through your neighborhood association, or maybe you have a business district or corridor improvement authority. If you're downtown, through the DDA, certainly reaching out to the Rapid. Heck, just call 311 and ask your question, and they'll get triaged to the right person or the right department. And, we're certainly as a city looking to pilot and partner more around transportation and mobility, whether it's our existing partners or new partners, and trying to create Grand Rapids oriented solutions, because they're not one size fits all. So taking tools that are out there, but trying them out here and then making those adjustments that work for our residents and our visitors, and definitely really focused on having really all ages, abilities, transportation system that is accessible and comfortable and affordable, is a really focus for the city. So I appreciate everybody's time here, and I hope it's been helpful to people. And like I said, we work together, the people on this call and others to work on increasing and improving mobility.
Great. Thank you. And then Mark.
I guess just a couple of parting thoughts is that, you know, in Grand Rapids, we've done a great deal of planning over the years. I think a lot of that has been talked about in this call. I think from our standpoint, we would really like to just implement. We have the plans. We've done a lot of engagement around those plans. And so our real focus and even our recommendation to folks is to say, let's implement. Let's go out and implement at various scales. Let's start building things. Let's start testing things, even if they're pilots. And let's not be afraid to fail as we begin to test these things and see where they go. Because I think that's what's going to lead to the real change. People seeing stuff on the ground, people using it, people engaging with it, and seeing that it does work. And then I think the other thing that's a corollary to that is, as citizens, just don't get brushed off with technical jargon from especially the engineering community when it comes time to build things, because that is relevant today and it's there and it's very persuasive oftentimes, but residents and lay people oftentimes know a whole lot more about these places that we are talking about redesigning and rebuilding because they're living in them and they're experiencing them on a daily basis. So I think the expertise lies in our users, and oftentimes not in the top-down approach, but rather the bottom-up approach.
Actually that's a great kind of closing point. I mean, I think my takeaway, having listened to all of you this morning, is just how, you know, and obviously from Start Garden's perspective, we work with a lot of entrepreneurs and people who want to start businesses, and you know, placemaking and how your community connects and interacts is really important to entrepreneurs. And so I think that knowing that there's opportunities and there should be opportunities for input and to speak up and to be aware that these conversations are happening and they could impact the decisions that you're making as you think about growing and starting a business. So I want to thank everybody for being here this morning. I think it was a great conversation. It's obviously it's ongoing, and maybe at some point we can, you know, touch base with you all again and see some of these fun new opportunities that are coming forward. So thanks again, and thanks everybody for being here for the Juice this morning.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was fun. Thanks, everybody.
Well, I
Thank you.
appreciate your time. Okay. Bye-bye.